This is Yvette Carnell from Your Black World and BreakingBrown.com. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Nathan Robinson. Nathan Robinson wrote the book Super Predator, which is Bill Clinton's use and abuse of Black America. And one of the reasons that I really want Black America to read this book is because I want us to understand, Hillary Clinton's about to become our next president. So I want Black people to understand who Bill Clinton was, who Hillary Clinton is, and an extension of this Team Clinton, most powerful political family, I think, in America right now. And so that's where I want to begin. Now, one of the things, and I can say this to you, Nathan, is that this is the book that I wanted to write, right? Like sometimes you come across a book and you're like, I wanted to write that book, and somebody got to it first, and that's how I felt about your book. And so, one of the first questions I want to ask you is, you're not Black. So what made you decide to kind of zero in on this as like, this is what, I got to people about your background, your Eric, current affairs, great publication, what made you decide like, this is going to be the book that I'm going to write?
So I kind of shared your feeling on this, I think, which is the feeling like, I wish someone would just systematically go through and document what I know to be true. This is a book written out of anger, right? and the anger that motivated it, I wrote it very quickly because, I saw over the course of the campaign that what happens when Democrats are running a candidate, especially when they think that if their candidate doesn't win, the apocalypse is going to unfold, is they're willing to distort history in all manner of ways in order to serve their political ends. And as someone who sort of knows, knowing some of the history on this, it made me very, very upset to see it being distorted and to see the Clinton record being turned into something other than what it is. And I've seen these things become quite successful. The defenses against attacks and the suggestion that Clinton, this Bill Clinton as the first Black president thing, this has had some lasting power, and people still think of the Clinton years as being some sort of golden age for Black interests in American politics. And, that's just factually untrue. I think people need to understand that it's factually untrue. And so I wanted to go through and document how in a lot of different areas, in terms of criminal justice policy, welfare policy, in terms of what was done to Haiti, in terms of how Black appointees fared, this was just not the case in every single realm.
Exactly. And let me just put the book up for those of you who don't have the book. Like, this is the book to, if you want to really understand who the Clintons are. And one of the way, at the beginning of the book, I like the way you frame it, right? What you basically come in saying is, let's look at this and see whether or not Bill Clinton was just doing what was politically feasible, right? If he was making a calculated choice for what benefited him politically. And what you came away with, you had a very good comparison in there about, like, racism and if lunch counters or whatever. And if you're choosing this path all the time, then, like, can you really say Republicans made me do it? Like, there are too many occasions of Bill Clinton doing stuff on his own to say Republicans made me do it. So, like, tell me a little bit more about that, because that's what we get.
So every time you come after the Clintons with this argument, you say, well, look at the growth of prisons, look at the end of welfare, look at what happened. There's a very strong defense that is made that I think is worth taking very, very seriously. And the defense is, well, look, you are just an unrealistic idealist. You don't understand the pragmatic necessities of politics, which is that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, they're good people trying hard, but they have to make compromises because politics is about compromises. And so I wanted to actually be very fair to that thesis, right? To take that thesis seriously and say, well, how would we know whether they were deliberately disregarding the interests of Black voters, or whether they cared about the interests of black voters, but were being forced into these kind of compromises. And what I wanted to, and the way I think you evaluate that question is you say, well, look what happens when there are moments where you don't have to make a compromise, but it's not necessarily doing anything for you, right? So I wanted to try and figure out how we can tell which one of these things is, in fact, true. And so when you look at it, you find that defense of the Clintons falls apart completely. And one of the reasons it falls apart completely is because in the 1992 campaign, Bill Clinton comes to prominence by doing something that no Democrat had done before, which is deliberately, from the very start, throwing traditional black political interests under the bus. Right, by having what was called the Sister Soldier moment, in which he prominently denounced, a black recording artist, by running on a tough on crime platform. The cover of the book, which I think represents this so well, is this picture that was taken at Stone Mountain in Georgia, the birthplace of the Klan, which is where Bill Clinton went for this photo opportunity in 1992, where he stood in front of a row of black prisoners with some Southern Democrat congressmen in order to show that he would be tough on crime. And in fact, his opponents in the Democratic primary at the time criticized him, said Bill Clinton was running on the platform, I'm going to lock him up, I'm going to keep white America safe. Well, that is not something that he's forced to do by Republicans. That is not a forced compromise. What that is an act of opportunism, deliberately realizing that there was political capital to be gained from hurting black interests and being willing to exploit that.
It's funny, when I look at it, I see, this is what I see. When you actually look at it, I see like black culture versus black policy. And so what Bill Clinton did is just like, playing the saxophone. He's into black culture. You mentioned that book about in your book, you mentioned the book, there's this book of journalists, and I have that book too, where they talk about how wonderful he is. And Donna Brazile, Donna Brazile had her own controversy as of late. But she says, when I was behind Bill Clinton in the line, in the food line at some fundraiser or another, or something like that, she says, he got the black eyed peas. As if, like, he was black just by the sheer fact that he was adopting black culture on some level. Yeah. And you really go into, like, Toni Morrison saying, I know she's backpedaled since then, but I mean saying that he's the first black president. And it's because he eats McDonald's and because he has, he comes from poverty. And it's like, you have to ask yourself, I ask myself as a black person, is this how we self-identify?
Yes.
Yeah. And so part of the problem that I have is the way in which he used black culture, and the way in which he asserted people and black people in high places, but actually actively went against the interest of black people, of ordinary working class black people. And one of the things that I want to ask you, like, there were a lot of things in the book that I didn't know, right, in terms of like prisoners not being able to sue necessarily, and over certain things. And
Prison Litigation Reform Act, which took away a lot of their previous rights,
and losing their right to to education. So, like, what I want to ask you, like, when you were doing your research, what did you come across that surprised you the most, or did you know most of what was in there?
Well, first, just to go back quickly to that point about culture versus politics, because I think that's really interesting. That book, Dwayne Wickham's Bill Clinton and Black America, is a series of interviews with black elites, with people who were journalists, who were prominent clergy members, who were community leaders, who all love Bill Clinton. The book is very positive about Bill Clinton, and it's all about Bill Clinton seemed to know how to talk. He knew how to get along with people. And I think that there was a very deliberate strategy on Bill Clinton's part. There's a class element to it, too, where Bill Clinton realized that if he placated certain members of the black elite through patronizing cultural institutions, then he would have a lot of political capital that he could use to disregard the interests of the large bulk of the black working class. And so there's this class thing where people in the upper middle class were happy because they got invited to the White House, and Bill Clinton deliberately cultivated this. At the same time as he put more people in prison than any other president before him. as you say, things that were surprising. I mean, there are a lot of little things I think that are surprising. One of there are things all throughout. I didn't realize that he gave a speech. He went to a black church during his presidency, and he gave a speech about how disappointed Martin Luther King would be if he were alive today. And he sort of takes on the voice of Martin Luther King and condemns absent black fathers. And now this is something that I think is just like, you know, even Bill Cosby got a lot of criticism for his pound cake speech for doing. Bill Clinton went way beyond that in this Martin Luther King speech, and didn't receive much flack from it. Right, even though it's a truly racist and horrible speech. When you look at the remarks he actually made, they're horrendous.
Yeah.
You know, when he said things like when he said to Ted Kennedy about Barack Obama, he said a few years ago, this guy would have been carrying our bags. You know, there are things that are just at a level of extreme that I think are totally unappreciated. Which is the degree of his callousness and the sheer degree of his willingness to be manipulative and to hurt people. So some of the extent of what happened in Haiti and Rwanda, I didn't realize until I did, and also the extent to which Bill Clinton was being dishonest about how much he knew about the Rwandan genocide. You know, when you go back into the press accounts of the time, he says he didn't understand the full extent of it. There are newspaper editorials every day in 1994 saying, Bill Clinton, you don't care about black lives. And he tries to cover that up retrospectively. And when you go back and you see the extent of the opposition that existed at the time, the things that Jesse Jackson was saying about criminal justice policy, those things make the defenses he now makes, they make it the more difficult to maintain, because this constant effort to rewrite history to say, well, it may look bad from where you stand now, but back then it made sense.
Yeah.
What I want people to understand is it didn't make sense even back then. People were calling him out even back then.
Yeah, this whole narrative that hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
And I just want to, you know, I just want to drill down on something else that you said about, you know, Stone Mountain and him going to Stone Mountain. He wasn't there alone. Like, there was this whole plan. The thing that we don't tend to understand is that there was a whole plan by these, you know, so-called centrist Democrats, including Southern Democrats, to kind of peel off white votes by kind of abandoning the base of which was black people. Black people were base Democratic Party. We're gonna appeal to white voters by distancing ourselves and showing that we can be tough on black crime. And I just want to read one thing in your book about Stone Mountain. You know, it said, you know, I mean, which is I you know, I kind of it's kind of amazing to me in terms of, you know, you talk about the DLC and you talk about the Stone Mountain Correctional Institute, and you know, if you say for a clutch of white politicians to pose in front of black inmates would be mildly nauseating in the most innocuous of locales. That Clinton did it with a pair of open bigots at the entrance to the Confederate Rushmore should violently churn the stomach. Okay, these are people, like, even at, like you point out later, even at the governor's mansion when he was governor of Arkansas, there were black people, black prisoners who came there to work for free.
Yeah.
And so here you are again, just this photograph, which I tried to find the photograph earlier and couldn't find it. I couldn't find the photograph at first. You have him in front of these inmates basically showing, I'm going to be tough on black people. I'm going to be tougher than Republicans on black people. So, I mean, you know, when I look at that, there's no Republican that made him do that. And this takes me directly into, you know, Ricky Ray Rector, his killing of a I can't even say mentally ill. Like, this man was missing part of his brain. Right. So I just want you to tell me a little bit about that story, about Bill Clinton killing a mentally disabled person, a black person, you know, in order to kind of win votes.
Yeah, so this is I think one of the most disturbing, but it's very illustrative, right? Because it's a good case study of how Bill Clinton works. Ricky Ray Rector is a young man in Arkansas who commits a horrific crime. he murders one person, then he murders a police officer, but then he tries to commit suicide. And in the course of trying to commit suicide, he shoots out a huge part of his brain and essentially lobotomizes himself. Essentially turns himself into a mental child. He's got the age of a 5 to 7-year-old. And so there's this, and Ricky Ray Rector is scheduled for execution at the same time as Bill Clinton is running in the New Hampshire primary. Now, Bill Clinton is the governor of Arkansas at this point, and there is a huge amount of pressure brought on Bill Clinton not to execute this man because he's essentially a child. And a lot of civil rights groups are looking at Bill Clinton to see what he's going to do, because to execute someone who is essentially a child is seen as just so barbaric, something just so far beyond what any Democrat should be willing to perpetrate. I mean, the point is made by some commentators. If a Republican did this, Democrats would hound them to the ends of the earth over it, because you don't. One of the things is, we're queasy about the death penalty generally, but the idea of executing people with the most severe mental disabilities is just morally horrendous. Well, Bill Clinton, not only does he go through with it, and not only does he oversee the execution, but he flies back to Arkansas from the campaign trail so that he can be seen in Arkansas by the press when he's doing it, because he realizes that it's an opportunity to seem tough on crime, to distinguish himself from other Democrats as, well, I am willing to execute anyone. And in fact, the people are begging him to stop. Jesse Jackson calls him and tells him, Bill, you can't do this. It's just, you can't, don't you have a conscience, essentially? And Bill Clinton actually lies to Jesse Jackson. Bill Clinton says, it's not in my power. I don't have the power to stop it. Well, that's false. He did have the power to stop it. But he's unwilling to be held accountable. And so he goes through with it, and then he goes on to do very well in the New Hampshire primary. But here you see something where Bill Clinton probably, or almost certainly, would have been the president even if he hadn't executed Ricky Ray Rector. It was the smallest amount of political gain, but the point is that there was nothing to be gained from not executing him. So the moral consideration didn't enter into it. It was, can I gain some trivial piece of political capital versus what's to be gained from the other side? And yet the act itself is just morally horrific.
But this is not the first time. Like, if I'm reading your book, this is not the first time that Bill Clinton sort of lied to black people or lied to black politicians. I mean, when you look at you talk about the crack disparity.
Yeah. And,
he's sort of signaling and talking to people that, yeah, I'm going to do something about that. But when the time comes to do something about that, he doesn't, does he?
No. What Bill Clinton actually, on the crack disparity, is one of the sneakiest things he did, because every time black journalists would, because this is a major issue. I mean, it's been, for many years in American politics, it's been seen as one of the most obviously racist policies in criminal justice. And so, every time black journalists confront him and say, well, do you find the crack powder sentencing disparity unfair? He says, yes, I don't like that at all. I would end the disparity. Well, when he's later asked, well, how would you end the disparity? He says, well, I hate drug dealers. I think we should raise the penalty for powder cocaine. So, he's deliberately misleading people into thinking that he wants to lower the crack sentencing to something reasonable. But he's like, oh, I believe in equality. I believe everyone should be punished more. So, I mean, it's very, very sneaky. And then, of course, he actually rejects the sentencing. His own sentencing commission issues a recommendation to end or to reduce the disparity. And, I mean, he had the political cover, right, because he could say, I'm just deferring to the Sentencing Commission. They are a neutral, nonpartisan body. I'm just going along with what they say. So it wouldn't have been a particularly large political sacrifice, but the point is, it might have been some tiny political sacrifice, because Republicans might have made a noise about
Jumped on it, yeah.
And the point is, if there's nothing to gain, then he's unwilling to do it. The moral considerations do not enter the picture.
I mean, that's the theme throughout in terms of black people, right? Moral considerations do not enter the picture. Bill Clinton does what is best for Bill Clinton's political future. And it's just unfortunate for black people, it seems, that, we came during an age where it was pretty politically, good, to actually I'm going to be tough on black people. I'm going to be tough on crime, which includes a lot of black people. And I think that one of the most important things for me in your book is the stuff that I didn't know. Like, I didn't know this stuff. I didn't know like how much his policy ended parole. Like, I didn't know like this, we're talking about the virtual end of parole, and these are things that, like, what you were saying in your book, that he like full-throatedly advocated. It's not something that like, well, the Republicans tossed it here and I thought, no, these were like things that you advocated, even in terms of the one strike policy, and then like how that trickled down to states. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about that. Then I have another passage of your book I want to read, which I thought was phenomenal.
Okay. So the one strike thing that you mentioned, I think, is interesting, and it's another example of Bill Clinton using his discretion without being pressured. Right, so what people talk about the 1994 crime bill, which had which was terrible, which had a significant negative impact. But it's also true that what Bill Clinton did through executive action in housing projects through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they basically turned housing projects into surveillance states by introducing this one strike policy, which essentially said if you were suspected of drug use, not if you were convicted, but if you were suspected, you would lose your public housing. And so a lot of people, and so it created this situation in which it empowered local housing authorities to have constant surveillance on people, and which I have all sorts of stories in there of elderly grandmothers who are kicked out of their public housing because their grandsons are staying over the night and they suspected it. It's just horrific. But the point is that this was a policy that was not like a bill passed by Republicans that Bill Clinton then signed. It was a policy that was introduced in the executive branch by Democrats as part of a concerted tough-on-crime strategy. And the tough-on-crime thing is entirely because Bill Clinton thinks there's going to be political capital to be made of it. Bill Clinton says this. There are quotes where he says, they can knock me on a lot of things, but they'll never be able to say that I'm tough on crime. Right? He realizes that it is an asset, and he realizes that he can take the black vote for granted because he can basically say, well, who else are you going to vote for? You're going to vote for a Republican? And the answer is always no. Right? This is this same kind of threat that is being used by Hillary Clinton with Donald Trump, where Hillary Clinton says, well, who are you going to vote? Are you for Trump? And you go, well, no, I'm not for Trump, obviously, because he's a white supremacist. So they're able to sort of blackmail you in this certain way, and extort votes out of people by saying, well, look, there's no alternative to me, and that gives them license to do anything.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. In terms of how that gave the Clintons license. We were a captured vote. And we still are to a certain extent. We're a captured vote. So, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Like, where are you going to go? So even when they do something like, I know you mentioned like school funding and like there was nothing that we can do. And I just want to read one more passage from the book. And this is kind of where you landed, but I think it's important. It's on like page, I think it's a 232. You say, under Clinton's theory, when it came to race, there was simply no political gain to be had in supporting civil rights. But to prevent a full-scale revolt of the Democratic base, Clinton continued to use racially progressive language. His speeches included numerous rhetorical tributes to traditional liberal values, while making sure white conservatives knew he could be relied on not to act on those values. As far as black voters went, Clinton held their support by working hard to incorporate black Americans culturally so that he would not be called upon to give them anything politically, and thereby risk alienating his conservative white constituency. And I'm going to jump a little bit, and it says, hence Stone Mountain. Clinton would attend a congressional black caucus luncheon on one day, then visit the birthplace of the Klan on another. And we're talking about Stone Mountain. And I'm from Georgia. So CBC members would be too flabbergasted that a white politician cared enough to come to their events to muster any real objection when Clinton aggressively pursued the votes of Southern racists. That's a pretty powerful passage there. And you know, unfortunately, I think what it shows is, what I like to point out to people is that we're not that far from slavery, right? So what happens in terms of, I believe, the black electorate is that we're not that far from slavery, so we've not really had any politicians really kind of just like embrace us as a community. Yeah. So on one hand, it's kind of understandable that we would be like, oh my God, somebody likes us, right? You know what I mean? Like, you know, on one hand, I'm kind of mad about it, but on the other hand, I'm like, I kind of understand where that need to be accepted as a full citizen and, you know, somebody worthy of praise kind of comes from. But on the other hand, you look at that and you see that, I mean, you talked about at I think it's Arkansas, like he's in the Black Arkansas, what is it, like the Arkansas Museum of Black?
The Black Hall of Fame. Oh. Arkansas Black Hall of Fame. They inducted him. I think he was their first white inductee, but they don't induct many white people.
And that's where we are. And so, and you know, even in terms of like, there was something you said about, you know, what you just mentioned a little while ago in terms of prison litigation reform. Yeah. So like prisoners can't sue unless like they're like really physically harmed, as opposed to like, you know, psychologically, maybe I was raped and maybe I had
as long as it doesn't leave bruises.
Yeah, like how does that? I just like it was almost as if to me that he was willing to do anything. And you know, we go back to, you know, we've already talked about Ricky Ray Rector. Like you were willing to do anything to black people in order to win the votes of people who didn't think black people were worth anything anyway. And the most important thing I find about your book is that we really go into the fact that Clinton did this, a lot of this, like you look at drug testing. Like this was on your own. Even if you look at the super predator thing, right? When you talk about the super predator, it was based on like a lot of flawed like academia.
Yeah.
But even you know, I want you to discuss this a bit. Even when we kind of got a clue that this stuff wasn't good, that this was like he kept pushing.
No, that's exactly it. So the book is called Super Predator. About, you know, people kind of know this term now because Hillary Clinton notoriously used this. This theory in the early '90s that there were a bunch of wild, juvenile super predators who were going to overrun the country, and it was quite obvious that it was racial. In fact, some of the academics who first proffered this pseudoscience admitted that they were talking about young black men. And, Hillary Clinton pushed this line in the 90s, but the point is, again, that even then, many academics were extremely critical of it. They're pointing out that this was just nonsense. There was just no evidence that there was a wave of young, sociopathic super predators coming. But one of the really interesting things, if you want to think about whether Bill Clinton has changed, is when he was confronted by Black Lives Matter, back in April, and this is the incident that I begin the book with. When he was confronted by Black Lives Matter about the super predator term, he said, well, what else would you have called them? That's what he said this year. Yeah. He said, well, what else would you have called them? So he's still defending this term. Now, Hillary Clinton had apologized for it, but Bill Clinton apparently didn't get the memo that you're not supposed to say it anymore. And again, you see this calculation where he realizes that there's not much to be gained by disowning the super predator term. So he's still defending this term, even though it's horrendously racist. The irony that I try and bring out in the book is to say, well, your definition of super predator is people who is a sociopath with no conscience, no empathy, no ability, just takes what they want regardless of how it affects others. Well, let's think about who the true super predator is under that definition. But I think it tells you a lot that term is still being defended.
Yeah, and even in terms of when you look, something that you said that I really didn't know. I look at Bill Clinton. When I think of Bill Clinton, and this goes to the importance of data. When I look at Bill Clinton, I'm thinking he got more votes than anybody, any Democrat ever. Like that's how much black people love him. But you pointed out some data that like he didn't even do better than like Dukakis and Mondale.
No.
So even the data about even what we know about him as a white Democratic president,
Yeah.
it's just overblown. You know, you would think we came out for him like Barack Obama. You know, it's like no.
Yeah. He got a lower percentage of the black vote than previous Democratic candidates, and one of the reasons was, as I say, you know, I don't want to. It's true that there were understandable reasons why certain people, as we said, you know, the expectations of white politicians were so low that if some guy came along, you know, incorporating people and inviting them to the White House, obviously that was seen as more praiseworthy than it actually is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to overlook black opposition to Bill Clinton, which was there. There are certainly plenty of people who saw through this at the time, you know, who didn't buy it for a minute, who were outraged at the Sister Soldier stuff, who were outraged. You know, I cite Jesse Jackson's 1994 speech about the crime bill, where he says, you know, this is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And, you know, we should learn to recognize a wolf in sheep's clothing. And so you really see that, like, even at the time, Bill Clinton wasn't the first black president. What Bill Clinton realized was that the number of black votes that he would lose by doing this stuff was vastly exceeded by the number of white votes that he would win back from the so-called Reagan Democrats who had deserted the party because they were too committed to civil rights.
You know, at a certain point in the book, you said it was when you were talking about Ricky Ray Rector. You said it was kind of inconvenient. I think inconvenient is the word you used for Ricky Ray Rector to be calling on, you know, to be depending on Bill Clinton for mercy, depending on, you know, because of where Bill Clinton was in his political life with Jennifer Flowers and everything. And so it kind of makes me wonder, were black people in general just sort of inconvenient to be relying on Bill Clinton for mercy during a time when the Democrats were trying to gain, you know, white Republican working class people? I mean, and to that extent, I'm going to pull it out a little bit and just ask you, you know, about Hillary. Like, are we still at a place where it's kind of like we're just inconvenient in terms of where we are politically right now?
But this is actually, I'm going to give you something that's almost optimistic.
Okay.
Right? Because the point here is that, so, like, if you have a racist society in which black political power is pretty low, it means that Bill Clinton won't respond to the interests of black voters because there's no interest in doing so. But Bill Clinton isn't exactly a principled racist, right? He's not trying to hurt black people, he just doesn't care whether he does. And what that means is, if the circumstances were different, right, if it helped Bill Clinton to serve black interests, he would be fine with doing that too. Okay. And so the point with Hillary is, she is susceptible to political pressure. And if you build political power and you make it so that she has to respond, it is possible, but you have to build that power and exert that kind of pressure, because she will do whatever the dominant political interest is. And so, if the dominant political interest is white supremacism, well, then she will be a white supremacist. But if we can erase that, then you can force her just like you could force Bill Clinton to bend to your political whims. I mean, Bill Clinton had certain instances in which he was forced to do this, right? He couldn't discard affirmative action completely because it was a bridge too far. Because there was sufficient power behind to defend affirmative action, to where he had to come out and he had to defend affirmative action. He was going to condemn it and he had to defend it because pressure was placed on him. And there were certain things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Family and Medical Leave Act. These were areas in which progressive pressure from the left forced him to enact policies that he wouldn't have enacted if there wasn't that pressure. So this is an argument for keeping up our efforts to build power and hold people accountable.
You know, one of the things you kind of went to in the book, but I kind of want people to understand, is that the consequence of like Democrats adopting or like co-opting sort of Republican talking points and the Republican agenda means that stuff gets taken off the table. Like, if two parties aren't fighting about it, it's off the table because they agree. So I don't think that we can put ourselves as African Americans, in a position, where that sort of stuff is taken off the table. And I'd like to, and I think and I've mentioned this a few times, but I want to reiterate it because I think it's so important. One of the key points of this book to me shows how this wasn't something that Bill Clinton just did because he was negotiating. Even when you look at the Justice Department, there was something you mentioned about Bill Clinton, rejecting like 500 people getting out of prison or something of that nature. These are things like his Justice Department. His Justice Department grew. So I mean, these are things that were within Bill Clinton's power. So I think even when I look at the discussion that takes place in the black community in terms of like, even if we look at Obama, what could he do? What could he do? Like, you control your agencies. That's something that you control. Like, that's not, the Republicans can't come in to tell you, like, to do this. You got to do this with there are hearings, but you can't be told, like, do this with the Justice Department. Like, that's kind of your purview. So, I mean, that's one of the things that like, I really want to drive home when you look at drug testing. When you look at, eliminating death row appeals, when you look at, the filing fees in court and things like that, like these are things that Bill Clinton could have changed, and he didn't because it wasn't politically feasible or it wasn't politically advantageous for him to do so. So, this is kind of what I want to drive home, and so much of that I wonder about, in terms of how we want to be perceived. And you were saying a minute ago, like, if we politically apply that pressure to Hillary Clinton, like, this is something, that we can actually change. And and I'm wondering, like, is that so? Like, because I remember, I don't know if it was, I think it was the first 2000 when she ran against Barack Obama. Like, and she said, she went again to those white working class voters. So it almost seems to me like this is the Democratic Party now. Like, we have black people, and here we're going to throw it. So we have to build like an enormous infrastructure as black people to kind of get them back, to kind of be like, no, like we're the base, we're the firewall.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You have to be willing to revolt as the base and to not be taken for granted. And it does work, right? So the whole reason Hillary Clinton had to disown the super predator thing was because she was put under pressure from Black Lives Matter. Now, if Black Lives Matter had adopted the position that the Democratic Party wanted, which is, no, don't come after we're on your side, we're the Democrats, target the racist Republicans, well, then that never would have happened, right? It's because of a willingness to not be taken for granted and to put pressure on those who are supposedly your political allies, but to not accept the excuses. I think you can change things, right? Hillary Clinton's platform has become far more progressive on criminal justice than it otherwise would have, and the entire reason is that Black Lives Matter was willing to take her on over this. And if you hadn't been willing to take her on, then that wouldn't have happened. So we need to learn from the Clinton era, in which people went along with it, and people said, well, but accepted Bill Clinton's threat, which was, well, who are you gonna go with? Are you gonna go with the Republicans? What you gotta do is call that bluff and say, look, I don't care how you threaten me. I'm not going to put up with a racist and reactionary criminal justice policy. You can threaten me all you like. You can dangle Trump above my head, but it's not going to cause me to put up with and support things that are reprehensible.
Very good, very good, very good. Well, so I guess that's my answer in terms of where we go from here. I think kind of what you've laid the framework for is for like a kind of a infrastructure of political movement where like black people, African Americans have an agenda, and we are going to kind of force that agenda based on like who we are and what our values are and what we need as a community, as opposed to the needs of whatever politician is in front of us. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and maybe we'll talk again, because this is a conversation that's ongoing, right? The election is coming up on Tuesday.
During the Clinton years, during the upcoming Clinton presidency, it's going to be crucial to have a strong left opposition and to learn from history and to not let this happen again, where we put up with whatever the Democrats want to feed us. You know, there's going to have to be a left agenda that is enforced, and feet are going to have to be held to the fire in a way that they weren't in the 1990s.
Well, I can't do anything but second that. And the one thing I want to say, you know, get this book. Like, this is if you don't understand, like, a lot of people tell me when I'm online, like, I don't understand why you don't like the Clintons or why you're so opposed to the Clintons. Like, this book is the best, I mean, if you just want to put it, if you just want to, like, understand and get a primer on, like, how problematic the Bill Clinton was to the black community during this time in office. Like, this is the best way to do it. And it's you know, for a layman, it's like readable. It's not gonna just have you falling asleep. So I appreciate, I appreciate, you know, the way it was written. Like, it has all the information that you need, but it's not gonna put you to bed. And that's not something I can say for a whole lot of other people. So yeah, I really want to thank you, Nathan. I want to thank you for coming on and talking to me about it. And I hope, like I said, we can have this conversation again, because this isn't gonna stop.
Oh, it will not. No, it will not, unless we make it stop.
Exactly. Thank you.